Welcome, everyone. This is Ryan Bennett with the National Milk Producers Federation. I'm the Senior Director of Industry and Environmental Affairs here at National Milk, and I work on the Farm Environmental Stewardship Program. With me today, I have Juan Tricarco from the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, and he's the Vice President of Sustainability Research. As many of you know, the Farm Environmental Stewardship Program integrates the FarmSmart program, which was created by the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy and has been active for several years. So with the upcoming launch of Farm Environmental Stewardship on February 13th, we wanted to give you a little bit of background into how FarmSmart came about and then the process going forward for the Farm Environmental Stewardship Program and its integration of FarmSmart into its existing system. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Juan Tricarco to give some background on the science and models behind FarmSmart, which is now becoming Farm Environmental Stewardship. Juan, sending it over to you.
Yes, Ryan. Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me well?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. So thanks again for that introduction. And as Ryan indicated, I will go through a few slides today with you, with everybody, to discuss FarmSmart development and background so that we get an understanding of the thought process and the objectives behind the development of this particular calculation method and the engine that runs behind these calculations that are now going to be part of the environmental stewardship module of FARM or FARM. So the first thing I would like to remind everybody is that the goal is to equip the milk marketing organizations and the dairy cooperatives with the tools that they need to address the consumer and retail inquiries, and in that way be able to communicate progress in sustainability and stewardship in a measurable way. As such, the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy had a number of different projects that contributed to this goal. Of course, a lot of this work was initiated with life cycle assessment, which was initially started to look at carbon footprinting and then expanded to other areas of environmental impact. And that's the item that you've got on the top on the slide. Then you also have the framework, which we refer to as the Stewardship and Sustainability Framework for U.S. Dairy. And it is, in the way that I usually explain it, because that's the way that I understand it, is that it is somewhat of a language where a common language by which everybody in the dairy community can talk about sustainability in the same terms. And so the framework actually defines metrics and indicators, the specific units in which those indicators and those metrics need to be calculated and reported. And that's another piece of the whole system that supports this approach to meet the goal. And finally, FarmSmart, which was the actual calculator itself, the tool that allowed us to ask for inputs and from those inputs come up with an estimate at the farm level, at the farm gate on greenhouse footprint or carbon footprint, and in this particular case also energy footprint. So one of the reasons for focusing on FarmSmart is, in fact, that a large number of emissions actually originate on the farm. But also, the reason why we incorporated the energy piece is because energy continues to be, it is in fact the largest contributor to the dairy greenhouse gas emission. However, energy use is across the entire supply chain. So if you look at this graph, what we're showing here is pounds of CO2 equivalents per gallon of milk, expressed in the y-axis. And across the x-axis, the different bars represent different places within the supply chain. And you can see that I've highlighted fuel and electricity, the two middle bars. If you add them up, those two bars come up to a total of 6.48, which divided over the total of 1738 for the entire footprint for the entire supply chain equates to that 37%. However, as I mentioned, and as the graph clearly shows, this use of energy in the form of fuel or electricity actually spans the entire supply chain. However, FarmSmart cannot actually capture all of that. FarmSmart, however, can capture the emissions that occur on farm. And so if you look at the graph once again, but now we examine it from the perspective of the farm gate as the boundary, we see that everything in green that's labeled as feed production and everything in yellow that's labeled as milk production occurs at a farm, and therefore is what we call a farm gate footprint. You can see that therefore it includes enteric methane, which is the methane that cows produce by the digestion process of feed in their gastrointestinal tract and released to the atmosphere. There's manure management, which produces both methane if manure is stored under anaerobic conditions, and actually nitrous oxide under other conditions. And then you've got components of fuel and electricity that are employed either for milk production. Those would be, for example, electricity or fuel employed to run machinery at the farm for milking purposes or for handling cattle. And then also machinery that it's either at the dairy farm itself for feed production, so for example, growing, harvesting, storing corn silage. And then finally you see the fifth bar, which is labeled feed production at 138. That one actually represents nitrous oxide emissions directly from the soil of crops that are grown for dairy feed. Now this one is a little bit trickier because a portion of that will occur at the dairy farm, but also a large portion can actually occur at other farms that are not necessarily dairy farms, but are producing feed that will eventually end up in dairy rations. The idea here, as I mentioned earlier, is the fact that we took the LCA, we identified areas where we needed to measure, and then we developed the stewardship and sustainability framework to actually get commonality or a homogeneous way to talk about these things. So I want to say a couple of things about the framework. First of all, that it is voluntary. Second, that it actually defines and describes in detail the relevant indicators and metrics. You can see, in fact, that an indicator actually talks about the relevant measure that is used to assess sustainability, whereas when we talk about metrics, we actually talk about the specific way in which that indicator is measured. And so you see in the table at the bottom, for example, that energy use is a topic of interest for purposes that I already discussed when I showed you LCA results in the previous slides. The indicator in this case is energy intensity, and the metric is total energy use at the farm per pound of fat and protein corrected milk. And that's why it's an intensity measure. You can say the same exact thing for greenhouse gas emissions. We've got a GHG intensity measurement, and therefore it's expressed as total greenhouse gas emissions in tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per pound of milk, again, fat and protein corrected. The main purpose of doing this is that we can communicate and measure credibly. It is, in fact, very well defined. It is understandable by everybody across the supply chain in the same way, and therefore we can talk about it without confusion. And I was just wanted to mention that the development of this particular framework did include guidance from everybody in the supply chain, and you've got a list of types of individuals that participated, and we thank them very much for doing so. So LCA is the basis of FarmSmart in the sense that we took the actual life cycle study, the life cycle assessment that was done across a variety of different farms across the country, and we then had the research scientist produced a simplified model, which we refer to the reduced or simplified model. You see a picture in this screen or in this slide. That's the International Dairy Journal supplement that contains all the information, the 10 articles that talk about the actual LCA. There was, as the slide says, extensive on-farm data collection, a survey that was completed by a variety of farmers, and there was also extensive modeling of dairy cow rations. The point of the matter is that we could, and the scientists did, obtain a simpler model that used less input data and could give us a reasonable estimate that explains 98% of the variability in the total footprint and 91% of the variability in the feed print. So in this particular case, just as an example, the reduced model only requires the user to input 12 ingredients for the lactating cow ration, but the dry cow and heifer rations, it actually uses regional averages. And so that's one example of a way in which you can reduce the number of inputs and still get a reasonable estimate. This particular model calculates, again, farm gate emissions, so that means that that's going to be the emission load at the farm gate when the milk leaves the farm, and it adds, what it does, it sums or adds the feed, the enteric, the fuel, and the manure prints, which, if you remember the previous slide I showed you with the bars, those correlate to the findings in the LCA. Enteric from the cow, manure from manure storage and handling, feed from producing and handling feed, and then fuel is basically the energy. It actually includes electricity as well. We call it fuel, but it includes all the energy that's used. It's the energy print. So in this slide, what I want to show you is the relative importance in absolute terms of FarmSmart inputs to the output. So in terms of animal and feed management, there are a number of inputs that actually have an important impact on that greenhouse gas emission, on that carbon footprint. In this case, you can see that milk production is the largest driver of carbon footprint, and you can see from this tornado chart that the direction of that effect is negative. That means that if milk production increases, the carbon footprint is reduced. You can see that the number of cows is the next highest driver of the carbon footprint, and it's in the opposite direction of milk production. So that means that if there are more cows in the farm, it's likely that that farm will have a higher carbon footprint, and so on and so forth. You can keep on going through the list of variables or input variables, and you can see not only the magnitude of the absolute change, but also you can see the direction in which that change occurs. In the next slide, we look at a similar kind of analysis in a little bit different way, because some of the animal and feed management practices can be increased or reduced by percentage. So we can increase milk production by 5% or reduce it by 5% and see how it affects the output of the model. But we can't really increase or reduce by 5% manure management. So what we ended up having to do was to take a manure management option and then replace it completely for another. In this particular case, we took a model farm, just a farm that we simulated. Such a farm doesn't necessarily exist, but a farm in Minnesota with a variety of input variables that we identified as good input variables to run the simulation. And then we took their manure management and either had everything as solid storage or switch 95% of the manure through different types of storage or management options. And what we find, obviously, is you can see that solid storage, then you've got a 0 because, that's the baseline. You can see how that baseline changes when you modify the type of manure storage. So, for example, daily spread and treatment with forced aeration reduced relative to solid storage, while all the other manure management options increased it over solid storage. So again, this is the most important aspect of this information, is for us to understand that in this case, manure management is also a big driver of the footprint. And in fact, how that manure is managed at the farm will likely have a big impact on that carbon footprint. So with that, Ryan, I think I've gotten most of the pieces that we wanted to communicate, and I can pass on the baton over to you and stick around for questions later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Juan. Once again, if you have any questions for either myself or Dr. Tricarico, please use that chat box that's in the top right-hand corner of your screen. There's that chat function that you can click on and type your question, and we can get to them at the end. So please feel free to use that while I'm speaking. So I'll go ahead and move on to what we're now doing with FarmSmart and how that's being integrated into the Farm Environmental Stewardship Program. So Farm Environmental Stewardship will become the third leg of the Farmers Assuring Responsible Management Program. Most of you who are on this call are farm evaluators yourself for the Farm Animal Care Program and are experienced or knowledgeable about the Farm Animal Care Program, and then the second stool or the second silo of the program, responsible antibiotic use. So Farm Environmental Stewardship will now become the third silo of the program and will complement the other two existing silos in a way that we hope is more seamless and user-friendly for folks that have been using farm animal care and FarmSmart separately from one another. So once again, just to go over a couple of the things that Juan touched on in his talk, who can use Farm Environmental Stewardship? It's the same folks that can use Farm Animal Care. The difference is this is a voluntary program that you can opt into or opt out of and use in whichever way that you want. We do have things that we recommend on how you use the program, but we've got folks that are going to decide to use the program on every single one of their farms. We've got farm program participants that will not decide to use the program at all, and then we've got kind of a third middle ground option for folks that I'll talk about a little bit later with our sampling protocol that we'll have an upcoming webinar on to explain and get into a little bit deeper. So what is Farm Environmental Stewardship? It uses the model that Juan just explained to get a dairy's carbon and energy footprint from normally just under 48 different inputs. I've done several of these, and I can tell you that it takes about an hour in addition to your existing animal care evaluation or an hour to the farm by itself. We'll talk a little bit later about how to make sure that you get that done in an hour, but you can also can everybody hear me?
I can, Ryan.
If somebody can chat into the, okay, so you can hear me. Sorry about that. I had somebody saying that they could not hear me, so I wanted to make sure that we were being heard. So I'll talk a little bit here shortly about a couple of different things that you can do to ensure that you do that, that you're able to do an assessment in an hour or less. Obviously, depending on the circumstances, it could take slightly more than that, but I've done farms of different varying sizes and with varying levels of preparation ahead of time, and I found the average to be about 1 hour. So why are we deciding to do this? Juan did a good job of talking about the the Innovation Center's work on this and why we're doing this. But when you really step back and think about it, this is a positive thing to be measuring and promoting. So you see the meme there on the left or the infographic there on the left that you've probably either seen on the internet or heard about in different presentations about the great progress that the dairy industry has made in terms of the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, but also you'll see from the same study that this infographic was created from, you'll see how the dairy industry uses less water, less land, so on and so forth. So while the rate of decrease in emissions has slowed in recent years because we've become so much more efficient in our production so quickly, that trend is still continuing today, and farm environmental stewardship will help capture that and promote that to our customers and consumers in a way that's hopefully as user-friendly as possible. It's the greenhouse gas emissions, the fuel print, the energy print that Juan discussed are highly correlated, obviously, with production efficiency and improved economic performance, something that dairy farmers are already very interested in and working on a daily basis. So what we're hoping to do is capture that great work that they're already doing to become more efficient, and if we can, help them to find the resources necessary to maybe lower their footprint even more while also keeping an eye on their bottom line. Greenhouse gases are one of the main indicators that customers are requesting when they send out surveys, so on and so forth. And also, I mentioned before that a lot of our animal care participants are also using FarmSmart and requested an easier way of seamlessly collecting both sets of information on the farm when they're already out on the farm doing animal care assessments. So I have here our timeline for the Farm Program's Environmental Stewardship launch. It started this summer with a group of people who were National Milk members who have been working on and have either used or been highly involved with the creation and rollout of FarmSmart, and we really looked at how to bring farm environmental stewardship into the farm program in the most seamless way. That's now going to culminate here in about 2 weeks with the Farm Environmental Stewardship launch on February 13th. We're obviously having this webinar series, but we've also created a user guide with some other sample materials such as the Getting Ready document and a paper copy of the assessment. And those are available in the Resources tab after you've logged into the farm database. We're in the process of redoing our website, and those will also be available on the Environment page of our website here shortly. So once you get your footprint results, so we talked about the user guide, once you get your footprint results, so what are you going to do with those results? And at that point, we're looking at a project guide that we've created, or that we're in the process of creating, that we will launch in April, that will really take a look at those farming practices that, for the most part, probably most folks have already looked into or are already doing, but it might provide that one thing to lower your footprint and at this time hopefully either lower your bottom line or improve your your liability of your dairy farm. So look for that later this month, and I also will talk a little bit more about some of the upcoming webinars that we will be recording and posting on the website as well. So I mentioned our Getting Ready document. That's really just, you know, trying to have the farmer ahead of time get together as many materials as possible. So milk production records that show that protein content and fat content of their milk, how much milk they produced last year, how many cows or heifers they have of varying ages, you know, records on culling, so on and so forth. Nutrient management plans, if they have them, and things like your ration, electricity bills, so on and so forth are examples of what you would look for ahead of time. And like I said, 48 different inputs is, on my experience, on the high side of what has, you know, what I've found to be necessary to get a farm's carbon footprint, fuel print, and feed print. So, not feed print, energy print. So what does the assessment look like? As Juan mentioned, we're looking at fat and protein corrected milk. So if you have a bunch of dairy cow, if you have a bunch of Jersey cows or a bunch of Holstein cows, how are we going to look at that, you know, their milk production in a way that is normalized? And that fat and protein corrected milk number is, you know, in the background of this, and it's calculated by inputting your annual milk production, your protein content and fat content. So that way we can compare farms with different components in their milk. Average size and age of cows, energy, how much fuel you're using, so on and so forth. One thing to note on this is we try and find how much fuel and electricity that we're using on the dairy. So if you're using feed that's not being incorporated into into your rations and it's being sold off the farm, you might think about taking a percentage of that extra fuel that you use in those months where you're planting and harvesting. You know, try and get as exact as possible, and we have really good ideas for how to do that within the user guide that we've created that we've put in the resources section in the database. Crops, the percentage that's produced on farms, feed. So really we're looking at dry matter intake of all the different major components in a ration, things that most farmers would have already. And then manure. So that's you know, something that some people will know exactly, and some people will be more of a calculation. For example, one farm that I went to had 2 different types of manure management systems. They had one form of manure management in their barn, and they had another in their parlor. So we looked at how many hours per day cows spend in the parlor compared to how many they spend in the barn, and we put the percentages, corresponding percentages of those in here. So like I said, it's not always an exact science, but we try and get as close as possible, and we have you know, some really good user experience that we've incorporated in the user guide that I keep mentioning. Just real quick while we're on manure, one, you know, had those really useful tornado charts about the relative impact. One thing we've talked about is if you saw the tornado chart on manure management systems, you would see where daily spread and like forced aeration are negative. We do have an eye towards greenhouse gases in this model and your carbon footprint, but we don't want to do that while not keeping an eye on unintended consequences. So obviously forced aeration with the cost and daily spread with potential liability in certain parts of the country could obviously become a problem, and we keep an eye on that, especially in the project guide that we're creating, where we're making recommendations for folks who are looking to lower their lower their footprint in the model, while also either managing their liability on things such as manure or lowering or improving their bottom line on things such as production or energy. So that all culminates in your greenhouse gas emissions per pound of CO2 per pound of fat and protein corrected milk. You'll see here it has it broken down in the major parts of the assessment of your footprint in feed production, enteric emissions, fuel use, and manure. And it compares your footprint to a farm of similar size in your region and on a national average. So going forward, we have obviously this series of webinars upcoming, and the next one will be a database introduction with Texas A&M. So those folks will be able to walk you through how you are going to use farm environmental stewardship. Just a little, we are using the existing database for animal care and implementing environmental stewardship as a part of that database. You'll also be able to use the existing web and mobile entry apps to enter your farm environmental stewardship assessment. So not much will change, but there will be some things that you'll want to learn through that webinar process. As I mentioned, we launch on the 13th. We don't plan to launch with a bunch of fanfare or make this a big thing, but it will be available to folks starting on the 13th. We're actually wrapping up our beta testing process today, making sure that the system's working properly for that launch here in about 2 weeks. I mentioned before the Farm Environmental Stewardship Sampling Protocol, and that protocol is being developed for those folks who, want to use the program, but with maybe the introduction of Farm Animal Care version 3, for example, which requires, a little bit more work on the side of the evaluator, don't want to have to do every single farm, but want to be involved in some way. So we looked at we're finishing up a sampling protocol that will be available at the time of the launch that really selects a statistically valid number of farms to assess in a random way through the use of an Excel spreadsheet. So through that protocol, we used zip code and annual production of the farm in order to randomly sample, and that's not something that we're doing. That's something that we've created in order for co-ops and milk marketing organizations to do on their own to randomly assess farms on an annual basis. And then finally, I mentioned that project guide that we're working on. We really think this will be a first of its kind document that will really look right now on greenhouse gas, energy and fuel, but it's something that we see as something that could, potentially provide more information on other indicators in the future. So with that, I'll go over here to the questions box and start hopefully trying to answer any questions. So, Juan, this is actually a question for you, if you can answer it. How much variance in the environmental numbers can be seen in different parts of the country?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So, yeah, I saw that question come in, and the life cycle assessment was regionalized. There are 5 regions, and therefore, those regions are still reflected in the stewardship module. That means that regional values are used for different aspects of the calculation and also for different inputs. Like I mentioned through my presentation, the heifer and calf diets are just regional averages. Now, you do have to think that also there are some aspects of the calculation that the best number that we have right now are national numbers, and so national numbers are used. But by having that regional aspect incorporated into the reduced model, that regional variance is part of it, so it's taken into account. In terms of if the question refers to how much variance in the environmental numbers can be seen in the different parts of the country, one of the great big findings of the LCA was that the biggest drivers for changing for the footprint, the biggest driver for a footprint was not necessarily region, was not necessarily size of the farm or age of the farm. It has to do more with management practices. So there isn't, I mean, as I said, some of those aspects of region are captured in the calculation, but they're not huge. They're not huge. It's not huge variation.
Thanks, Juan. The next question is, does the evaluation need to be done on farm? I guess my answer to that would be no, it does not need to be done on the farm. However, I would say that it is recommended that you either do it on the farm or do it in a way that you have access, easy access to the farmer. So I mentioned before the example of your fuel use. I did one, for example, that I had the farmer right there, and he produced a lot more feed that was sold off farm than he used in his operation, and we were able to more quickly and easily figure out the number for his fuel use number by figuring out the percentage that is used, right there for feed that is fed on the farm, and we were able to, quickly get that assessment done. In order to do it accurately, you're probably going to need the farmer on call or at least available to you to some extent. We also don't require, similar on animal care, obviously the evaluator's up and walking around the farm and, verifying and checking and those kind of things. This is a paper exercise, so this can be done over top of a coffee table in the break room, but we do ask that folks obviously look at the information to ensure accuracy. So it could be done away from the farm, but the actual documents would ideally be scanned in or sent in a way that you could verify that that you're getting the numbers into the system accurately. Is there any training for evaluators? So as I mentioned before, this is not the same as the animal care program, and we're viewing this as something that folks can do as a supplement to animal care evaluations, but that does not require the same level of training. So we recommend obviously reading the user guide, the project guide when it comes out, viewing this webinar or the recorded version of this webinar, and then also I would recommend that highly, obviously, that evaluators that want to use this program are logged in to the session with Texas A&M that I mentioned earlier that will be on February 7th at 3 p.m. Eastern. What is the benefit to the farmer? So I think one of the biggest benefits to the farmer is being able to transmit information about what they are doing on their dairy farm that in a way that consumers are interested in and genuinely concerned about, in a way that is easy for them to transmit easily through the person marketing their milk. And so we think this program, obviously I mentioned, it takes an hour, but it tells a great story for the dairy industry. Farmers are often feel like they don't have a voice in what's being in the food discussion, and we feel like this is one way that they can send information up the chain. That way it gets out to customers. The other way that I think that it would benefit the farmer is through the project guide. After they go through an assessment, they may or may not be able to see, you know, somewhere where they're a little bit maybe low in one of those aspects of, or a little bit, I shouldn't say low, a little bit higher in one of those aspects of the footprint results. And we would have corresponding information in that project guide for them to look in through and kind of go through their head of things. Have they thought about everything? I think, like I said, most people have, but if there's that one thing that we can have in that project guide that lowers your footprint and at the same time improves your bottom line or helps the, you know, the liability of your dairy farm, then we feel like that project guide was successful. So that would be the other aspect of this, is that with it being highly correlated to production efficiency and our work on the project guide document that includes a lot of information consistency, we hope that there will be at least something for farmers of all sizes in there to maybe glean from that document. Can you explain the sampling protocol? I can't explain it as well as Dr. Mark Kinzel will be able to explain it on February 14th at noon Eastern. But I can say that the sampling protocol takes the farm's annual milk production and their zip code and is able to pick out a random sample of farms of all sizes and different geographic regions in a way that fairly and randomly selects farms. So in other words, in a way that we can honestly say that this is an accurate picture of our milk supply by only looking at a percentage of the farms without getting into cherry picking farms or having to do every single farm, for example. We send out invites to 4 upcoming webinars to those listening to this presentation. So we have sent out links to the webinars, and we will continue to do so if you're in the farm database. To those not in the farm database, you will be able to find access to those webinars on our website, nationaldairyfarm.com. And we will also be posting information about how to get on to those webinars via social media. Next question is, who can view the results once a farm is in the program? If enrolled into the program, how often are farms evaluated? So the first question, who can view the results? The results can be viewed by the farmer and the person marketing their milk. So that company that's actually inputting the results, and the output results would then be emailed to the farmer and would be saved in the database under the company or cooperative that is doing that assessment. The farm program as a whole only has the aggregate data from that farm, so that way obviously we can use that to promote the success of the dairy industry as a whole on a national basis. The next question is, enrolled into the program, how often are the farms evaluated? I mentioned before that we really have you know, folks who are you know, going to do every single farm, maybe every single farm every 3 years. Then we have folks that are going to do the statistical sampling protocol, and that sampling protocol that we've created mirrors that animal care model that I mentioned. Some people are not going to do this as a supplement to their animal care evaluations, but a lot of folks will. And so we're looking at a random sample of farms to do once every 3 years, in line with our animal care evaluation process, which requires an animal care evaluation once every 3 years. Walmart is requesting that suppliers have new GHG estimates every year calculated from local farm data. Will this module fulfill this requirement? So it certainly can. I mentioned before that it's up to the user to be able to decide how they want to do that process. Our in line with our animal care evaluation process, which goes every 3 years and will be at or above a 95% statistical significance level, which is obviously the gold standard in terms of statistical sampling. Our company's creating a baseline for greenhouse gas and energy use on the farms in 2017, and in future years setting goals for their milk shed, working with the farmers to change practices to reduce energy use or GHG emissions. So this program, while it gives, your baseline, I've never heard of anybody using a guideline or setting any requirements. But I do know that folks have worked with their farmers to lower their footprint in the past and helped provide them information to be able to do that. I think that, that will continue with the project guide, but I'm not aware of anybody that's setting any sort of guidelines to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. More of a information and more of an informational use, almost extension type activity at this point. What is the plan for farmer adoption? Since it is voluntary, how will they get educated on its existence? Are there any farmer adoption goals? So in terms of farmer adoption, the biggest thing, obviously, FarmSmart itself was actually relied on the farmer to input the data. Since we have an animal care program that encompasses almost the entire milk supply, that we're doing animal care evaluations on once every 3 years, we have, we've really used that model as where we're going with this, and we've switched from relying on the farmer to input that data to then having that evaluator or that field staff from the company or co-op work with the farmer to get the data that they need to get it in the system. So that's really one of the big strengths that we see in moving this into the farm program, is that we have over 400 people trained to do animal care evaluations that are on farms anyways, and now they can work with the farmers to do that. In terms of farmer engagement, we are engaging the dairy press. We're trying to get out there as much as possible. We're doing a webinar with Fords here in February, and we're trying to do as many producer engagement sessions on things like World Dairy Expo, so on and so forth. So we are trying to get out there as much as possible, but there is, there is a lot of this that, can be done by the company or co-op in order to help inform their producers. And we're happy to work with you on any newsletter articles to your membership, things like that, if you so need it. We've also done a lot of work trying to get out and attend a lot of meetings and get the word out about this process and what we're doing here. Will the database link directly to the farm database? Yes, we are using the existing farm database and the existing user web entry and mobile entry apps that the farm animal care system uses. Is the data kept confidential? If the farmer and the person marketing their milk can see the data, can the results be traced back to the farmer, or is it kept anonymous? As I mentioned before, it's between the farmer and the person marketing their milk, and on how they share that information. I will say that, the companies that I know that have been using this information in the past, if they're sharing farm-level data, it is very, very anonymous, the way that they do their process. But most folks are using this at more of an aggregate or milk shed level. So they're aggregating the results of their full supply chain or the farmers that are marketing to them. Got a couple more questions here. This question has to do with the program becoming mandatory and, will it remain a voluntary program? So one of the misconceptions about the Farmers Assuring Responsible Management Program is that this is a program that is ruled, in a way that's just by somebody in the office here coming up with an idea and carrying that out. So we actually have a full governance system in place where we have a Farm Smart Integration Task Force that has now become the Farm Environmental Stewardship Task Force that is made up of people that actually have to implement this. And then we have an environmental committee, which is made up of farmers and co-op field staff. And then we have the National Milk Board of Directors, which is over 75% farmer focused. So not up to us. It would go through a long process before it would ever get to that point. I quite frankly would be looking at new or additional indicators rather than being worried about it becoming mandatory. Any plans to add water foot to Farm Smart? So based off of my previous comment about additional indicators, that's something that we're watching, and if that's something that's being demanded of you or you think that it's needed, I'm guessing you're talking about a water indicator, water quantity indicator. Water quantity was a part of that life cycle assessment. So therefore, we do have the science to be able to add water quantity if we would want. But until we get farm program participants really coming to us a little bit more, telling us that that's something that they're interested in, that they need, that customers are asking for, and that they want to measure, that's not where we're at right now, but we are obviously keeping an eye on things like water quantity and nutrient management going into the future. Another question about data that I had answered before. Will this program disadvantage producers who grow all their own feed as opposed to those who purchase their inputs? It would not necessarily do that because there would be an assumption for purchased feed compared to an actual for people producing their own feed. Once again, it's not really looking at your aggregate number for carbon footprint, on the farm. It's really looking at your carbon footprint per pound of milk. Juan, if you're still there, I've got a question for you. Where can I find the LCA study from the International Dairy Journal? I can tell you that we will work on getting that and posting that in the resources section of the website, and we will also try and have it on the website, but it's not there currently, so I'll ask Juan for somebody who really needs it right away, I'll ask Juan to answer that part of the question.
Ryan, I think that it's fairly easy to get to it. That entire supplement is open access, so it means that anybody can read it. They don't need an account or, a membership with the journal. Probably a good idea for you guys to include the link somewhere. I can provide the link to you in just a few minutes. And then you can share with anybody directly.
Thanks, Juan. I've got a question here, and I think I've got two more questions, and then I think we've got to wrap it up here. But I've got a question about is there ability to pull reports from the database with the information? So not at launch time, but that is something that we have on our list to work on here later this year in order to be able to pull a report in a way that would seamlessly aggregate the information from your company or cooperative. So that's something that we're working on, and we know that it's needed, and we will have later in the year. But before we can get to that point, obviously we need data in the system. So we're working on it, and we hope and totally expect that by the time that you get enough farms into the system, the need to pull that data, that we will have that function available within the database. Has this tool been harmonized with any other on-farm sustainability measurement tools? How is this being shared with global groups, perhaps going after similar goals? Juan, I'll let you fill in any blanks that you can think of, but I know that we're talking to folks like Field to Market here in the United States. A lot of the other people from different programs have been reaching out to me, and that's something that we're interested in. But right now, we're trying to harmonize our own system in order to launch. But that's something that is a good question, because it's an obvious thing to be able to look into here going forward.
So yes, Ryan, we are evaluating that, and we are in work with Field to Market all the time. In fact, folks from our team participate in different Field to Market work groups or committees. I can't remember exactly the terminology that they use for the group of people that get together to get the job done, right? But yeah, they're working on that, and if anybody has more specific questions, I'd be glad to speak on a one-to-one basis. But there's the most important thing to understand is that some of the things that Field to Market does is on a field basis, and so there's a little bit of work that needs to be figured out in terms of how to make the two systems talk to each other. There's also other platforms that we are evaluating as well. So we're always looking to make sure that everything that goes into these calculations and these estimators, that they're always vetted, that they're backed by science, providing the sources for coefficients or whatever, so that we know how those calculations are made, and they are open for anybody to examine.
All right, with that, we're at 1 o'clock, so I thank everybody for being on the call today. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach me at rbennett@nmps.org. Thanks so much, and if you have any questions, feel free to weigh in with me offline here via email.
Thank you.